The year was 636, and the Muslim armies faced a colossal challenge. 120,000 Byzantine soldiers stood ready at the Yarmouk River, a natural fortress with steep cliffs and raging waters. Across from them, the Muslim forces numbered just 36,000, a fraction of the Byzantine might. The stakes could not have been higher. If the Muslims failed, the entire conquest of Syria would unravel, and the Byzantine Empire would strike back with devastating force. But if they succeeded, the gates of Syria would open wide, and the Ummah would take a giant step forward in spreading the message of Islam. As Al-Tabari recorded in his Tarikh al-Rusul wa al-Muluk, the Muslim commanders knew that victory was not just about numbers. It was about strategy, faith, and the will to overcome impossible odds. The Byzantine forces were not just numerous, they were seasoned warriors, equipped with advanced weaponry and fortified positions. Their commander, Emperor Heraclius, had chosen the Yarmouk River carefully. The river's steep banks and swift currents made it nearly impassable, giving the Byzantines a natural advantage. The Muslims, however, were not without their own strengths. Led by the brilliant general Khalid ibn al-Walid, they had already proven their mettle in battle after battle, relying on speed, discipline, and unwavering faith in Allah. Khalid ibn al-Walid, a man whose tactical brilliance was legendary even among the Sahaba, understood the gravity of the situation. He knew that a direct assault would lead to disaster. Instead, he devised a plan that would turn the Byzantines' strengths against them. As Ibn al-Athir notes in Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh, Khalid ordered his men to construct bridges and ford the river at night, under the cover of darkness. The plan was risky. Any misstep could mean annihilation. But Khalid's faith in Allah and his trust in his men were unwavering. He had seen miracles before, and he knew that with Allah's help, no force was insurmountable. The crisis came as the Muslim forces began their crossing. The Byzantines, alerted to the movement, launched a brutal counterattack. The Muslim vanguard found themselves trapped between the river and the enemy, facing overwhelming firepower. According to Al-Tabari, Khalid himself led the charge, rallying his men with words of encouragement and reminding them of their duty to Allah. "Fear Allah, and he will make you fear no one else," he declared. The Muslims fought with desperate courage, their faith sustaining them in the face of certain death. Slowly but surely, they gained ground, pushing the Byzantines back and securing a foothold on the far bank. But the battle was far from over. The Byzantines regrouped and launched wave after wave of attacks, their numbers seemingly endless. Khalid, ever the strategist, reorganized his forces, shifting them to counter the Byzantine advances. He exploited weaknesses in their formations, striking at their flanks and causing confusion. The Muslims fought with a ferocity born of conviction, their faith in Allah giving them strength beyond their numbers. As Ibn Kathir records in Al-Bidaya wa al-Nihaya, the Battle of Yarmouk became a test of endurance, a clash of wills where only the most determined would prevail. The turning point came when Khalid ordered a feigned retreat, luring the Byzantines into a trap. As the enemy pursued, the Muslims encircled them, cutting off their lines of retreat. The Byzantines, caught off guard, were thrown into chaos. The Muslims pressed their advantage, pushing the Byzantines back with relentless ferocity. The battle raged for days, but by the time it was over, the Byzantine army had been shattered. Their once mighty forces were in disarray, their morale broken. The Muslims had achieved the impossible. They had won a decisive victory against all odds. But even as the dust settled, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. Word arrived that fresh Byzantine reinforcements were on their way, and the remaining Byzantine forces were regrouping for another assault. The victory at Yarmouk was a triumph, but the war for Syria was far from over. The Muslim commanders knew that they would need to act quickly to consolidate their gains and prepare for the next phase of the struggle. For Khalid ibn al-Walid and his men, there was no time to rest. The fight for the future of Islam continued. In 634 AD, a mere 7,000 Muslim warriors faced an overwhelming Byzantine force of 40,000 near the town of Ajnadayn in Palestine. The stakes could not have been higher. If they failed, the fledgling Islamic State would be crushed before it could fully rise. As Ibn al-Athir recorded in Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh, the Muslim army, led by the brilliant general Amr ibn al-As, was vastly outnumbered. The Byzantines, under the command of Emperor Heraclius himself, believed victory was already theirs. The Muslim forces had just emerged from the arduous desert crossing, while the Byzantines were well rested and positioned on favorable ground. The terrain around Ajnadayn was open and flat, perfect for the Byzantine cavalry to maneuver and overwhelm their opponents. Amr ibn al-As, known for his strategic brilliance, understood the gravity of the situation. He had to find a way to counter the Byzantine numerical superiority. According to Al-Tabari in al-Tarikh, al-Rusul wa al-Muluk, Amr decided to divide his forces into two main groups. One group would engage the Byzantines head-on, drawing them into battle, while the other would flank them from the rear. This tactic aimed to create confusion and disrupt the Byzantine lines. The plan was risky. If the Byzantine forces realized the Muslims were outnumbered, they could quickly encircle and annihilate them. Amr's decision hinged on the element of surprise and the speed of his flanking maneuver. As Ibn Kathir noted in Al-Bidaya wa al-Nihaya, Amr's troops moved with remarkable discipline and speed, their faith in Allah giving them unmatched determination. As the battle began, the Byzantine cavalry charged, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. The Muslim front line held firm, despite the overwhelming force. Meanwhile, Amr's flanking force moved swiftly, unseen by the Byzantines until it was too late. The sudden appearance of the Muslim troops from the rear caught the Byzantines off guard, causing chaos in their ranks. According to Ibn al-Athir, the Byzantines, realizing they were outmaneuvered, began to retreat. Their once organized lines crumbled under the pressure of the Muslim assault. The Byzantine retreat turned into a rout, with their forces fleeing in disarray. The Muslim victory at Ajnadayn was complete, but the war was far from over. Amr ibn al-Az's tactical genius had once again saved the day, but the Byzantine Empire was not yet defeated. As Al-Tabari reports, Heraclius, though defeated, was already planning his next move. The Muslims knew that the Byzantines would regroup and return with even greater force. The victory at Ajnadayn was a crucial step, but the road ahead was still long and fraught with danger. In the scorching heat of Syria, the dust stirred by the hoofs of thousands of cavalry marked the desperate hour of the Byzantine Empire. With 40,000 seasoned Roman legions entrenched along the Yarmouk River, against them stood 36,000 Muslims, their numbers dwindling from the relentless battles of the previous days. The fate of the region hung in the balance, and time was running out. The stakes were clear. If the Muslim army faltered, the Byzantine Empire would regain its footing, threatening the very existence of the newly established Islamic State. The lands newly conquered by the Muslims, from Iraq to Syria, would be at risk of falling back into the hands of the Romans. The caliphate in Medina would be isolated, and the promise of a united Ummah under the banner of Islam would be shattered. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the legendary commander, faced an immense strategic challenge. The Byzantine forces were dug in along the southern bank of the Yarmouk River, their lines stretching for miles. They had the high ground, the river at their backs, and a formidable array of catapults and archers. The Muslims, though brave and determined, were exhausted from days of fighting and outnumbered. Khalid knew that a direct assault would be suicidal. He needed a plan that would disrupt the Byzantine formations and create an opening for his forces to exploit. He recalled the words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, "War is deceit," and understood the importance of strategy and tactics in battle. Khalid had a reputation for his audacious maneuvers, and he knew that the Byzantines would be expecting a frontal assault. According to Al-Tabari, Khalid decided to launch a daring feint. He ordered a portion of his army to simulate a retreat, drawing the Byzantine forces out of their entrenched positions. The plan was to lure the Byzantines into open ground, where the superior mobility and cavalry of the Muslim army could be fully utilized. Khalid chose this strategy because it played to the strengths of his forces while exploiting the weaknesses of the Byzantines, who were more accustomed to set-piece battles and less adept at maneuver warfare. However, the plan was not without its risks. The Muslims were already stretched thin, and a miscalculation could lead to disaster. Scouts reported that the Byzantine commander, Theodoros Tritherius, was a skilled and experienced general who would not be easily fooled. Khalid had to time the feint perfectly, ensuring that his forces were ready to strike when the Byzantines took the bait. As Ibn al-Athir recorded, Khalid gathered his commanders and laid out his plan. He emphasized the need for discipline and coordination, reminding them that their success depended on their ability to execute the maneuver flawlessly. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on Khalid, but his faith in Allah and his vast military experience gave him the confidence to proceed. The crisis came when the Byzantines, despite initial hesitation, began to move out of their entrenched positions. The Muslim feint had worked, but the Byzantine forces were larger and more organized than anticipated. Khalid's heart pounded as he watched the Roman legions advance, their disciplined formations a testament to their training and experience. For a moment, doubt crept into the minds of some of the Muslim commanders, who wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew. Khalid, however, remained steadfast. He reminded his men of the countless battles they had won against seemingly insurmountable odds. He spoke of the blessings of Allah and the righteousness of their cause, urging them to trust in divine providence. His words uplifted the spirits of his troops, and they prepared to engage the Byzantines in the open field. The resolution came swiftly. As the Byzantine forces advanced, Khalid ordered his cavalry to launch a series of lightning-fast attacks on the flanks of the Roman formations. The Muslims, riding swift Arabian horses, outmaneuvered the Byzantine cavalry and began to disrupt their lines. The Byzantine commanders, caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of the Muslim attacks, struggled to maintain their formations. Amr ibn al-As, one of Khalid's most trusted lieutenants, led a daring charge that split the Byzantine lines in two. The Muslims exploited the opening, pouring through the gap and attacking the Byzantine forces from the rear. The Byzantines, now surrounded and outflanked, began to falter. Their disciplined formations collapsed under the relentless pressure of the Muslim assault. The battle raged on for hours, but the tide had turned. The Byzantine forces, despite their initial advantage, were unable to withstand the onslaught of the Muslim army. Their lines broke, and they began to retreat in disarray. The Muslims pursued them relentlessly, inflicting heavy casualties and capturing vast amounts of supplies and equipment. But the battle was not yet over. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, reports reached Khalid of a fresh Byzantine force approaching from the north. This new army, led by the experienced General Bacchus, threatened to tip the balance once again. The Muslims, though victorious, were weary from days of fighting, and the prospect of facing another battle seemed daunting. Khalid knew that the fate of the region still hung in the balance. The Byzantines, though defeated, were not yet broken. Their empire was vast, and their resources seemingly endless. The Muslims, on the other hand, were far from their homelands, fighting a war on multiple fronts. The road ahead was fraught with danger, and the outcome was far from certain. With the Byzantines in full retreat after their devastating defeat at the Battle of Yarmouk, a new challenge emerged for the Muslims. The city of Damascus, just 50 miles north of the battlefield, was the next critical objective. With only 20,000 men, against a reinforced Byzantine garrison of 100,000, the Muslims faced an overwhelming task. As Ibn al-Athir recorded in Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, the commander of the Muslim forces, knew that the fate of Syria hung in the balance. The stakes were clear. Damascus was the heart of Byzantine power in the region. If the city fell, the rest of Syria would follow. But failure meant not just the loss of momentum, but the risk of being trapped between the Byzantine forces in Damascus and the remnants of their army retreating from Yarmouk. The Muslims had to act swiftly and decisively. The city was heavily fortified, surrounded by strong walls and guarded by a formidable army. The Byzantines had years to prepare for this siege, stockpiling supplies and reinforcing their defenses. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, known for his wisdom and strategic acumen, chose a daring plan. He divided his forces into 3 separate armies and launched a simultaneous assault from multiple directions. Khalid ibn al-Walid led one army to the eastern gate, Amr ibn al-Az to the southern gate, and Shurabil ibn Hassana to the western gate. This strategy aimed to overwhelm the defenders and prevent them from concentrating their forces on any single point. As Al-Tabari reported in Tarikh al-Rusul wa al-Muluk, Abu Ubaidah believed that speed and surprise were crucial. The Muslims had to strike before the Byzantines could regroup and organize a cohesive defense. According to Ibn Kathir in Al-Bidaya wa al-Nihaya, the Byzantines, led by their commander Bacchus, initially underestimated the Muslims. They believed their fortified walls and superior numbers would be enough to repel the attack. However, the coordinated assault caught them off guard. The Muslims, fighting with unwavering faith and discipline, breached the defenses at multiple points. The Byzantines, struggling to respond to the simultaneous attacks, began to falter. But the battle was far from over. As Ibn al-Athir noted, the Byzantines launched a fierce counterattack, pushing the Muslims back from some of the gates. Abu Ubaidah, observing the situation, realized that the key to victory lay in maintaining the momentum of the assault. He ordered his forces to intensify their attacks, using ladders and siege engines to scale the walls. The Muslims fought with incredible bravery, their faith driving them forward despite the heavy losses. In a pivotal moment, Abu Ubaidah himself led a charge against the northern gate, inspiring his men with his courage and leadership. The Byzantines, seeing their commander in the thick of the battle, began to doubt their own strength. As Al-Tabari recorded, the Muslims' relentless pressure finally broke the Byzantine defenses. The gates were breached, and the city was taken in a matter of hours. The fall of Damascus was a turning point in the conquest of Syria. The city, once a stronghold of Byzantine power, now stood as a symbol of Muslim victory. The Muslims, with their strategic brilliance and unwavering faith, had achieved the seemingly impossible. But even as they celebrated their triumph, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. news arrived that the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius was gathering a massive army to reclaim Damascus. The Muslims would have to prepare for another fierce battle, one that would test their resolve and their faith once more. After the resounding victory at Yarmouk, where Khalid ibn al-Walid led the Muslims to triumph over the Byzantine forces, the Islamic State stood at the threshold of an unprecedented expansion. With Damascus secured, the rumble of war echoed once more from the north. The Byzantine Empire, though battered, was not yet broken. Reinforcements poured in from the distant provinces of the Roman world, and a new commander, Bacchus, arrived to rally the remnants of the Byzantine army. As Ibn al-Athir recorded in his Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh, the Byzantine forces regrouped near the city of Hims, their numbers swelling to 80,000. The Muslims, though victorious, were weary from the relentless campaign. Their forces had dwindled, and supplies were stretched thin. With only 24,000 men under his command, Khalid faced a daunting challenge. The fate of the newly conquered territories hung in the balance. If he failed, the Byzantines would not only retake Damascus, but also push the Muslims back across the desert. Khalid knew that a direct confrontation with the Byzantine army was suicide. He needed to outmaneuver them, to strike where they were weakest. The terrain around Hims was rugged, with the Orontes River cutting through the landscape. The Byzantines had fortified their positions, relying on their numerical superiority and the natural defenses of the region. Khalid, however, saw an opportunity. He decided to split his forces, sending a detachment under the command of Amr ibn al-As to the west, while he led the main army eastward. The plan was audacious. By dividing his forces, Khalid risked being outflanked and overwhelmed. But he understood the Byzantine mindset. They were accustomed to fighting in traditional formations, with heavy cavalry and infantry. They would expect Khalid to attack head-on, not to scatter his forces. As Al-Tabari reports in his Tarikh al-Rusul wa al-Muluk, Khalid's strategy was rooted in his deep understanding of his enemies and the terrain. He knew that the Byzantines would not expect such a bold move, and he intended to use that surprise to his advantage. The night before the planned engagement, Khalid gathered his commanders. The weight of the decision was heavy on his shoulders. According to Al-Tabari, Khalid paused. The scouts reported that the Byzantine forces were moving to intercept Amr's smaller detachment. If Khalid committed his main force to the east, he risked leaving Amr vulnerable. But if he turned back to support Amr, the Byzantines would have the opportunity to regroup and launch a counterattack. Khalid's faith in Allah and his unwavering confidence in his men guided his decision. He ordered his forces to press forward, trusting that Amr would hold his ground until reinforcements arrived. The following day, the Byzantine army marched to meet Khalid's main force, unaware of the trap that was being set. As the two armies clashed, Khalid's tactics proved decisive. The Byzantine lines, expecting a straightforward battle, were caught off guard by the ferocity and precision of the Muslim attack. Meanwhile, Amr's forces, though outnumbered, held firm. The Byzantines, believing that Khalid's main army was engaged elsewhere, did not anticipate the sudden appearance of Amr's troops on their flank. The coordinated attack from both fronts shattered the Byzantine formations. Panic spread through their ranks as they realized they had been outmaneuvered. The battlefield became a chaos of retreating soldiers and collapsing defenses. The Byzantine army, once a formidable force, crumbled under the relentless pressure. Thousands of soldiers fled the battlefield, their dreams of reclaiming Syria shattered. The victory at Hims secured the Muslim hold on the region and sent a clear message to the Byzantine Empire. The tide of history was turning. But the war was far from over. As the dust settled on the battlefield, reports reached Khalid of a new threat. A fresh Byzantine army, composed of elite troops from Anatolia, was marching south to avenge their defeated comrades. The Muslims had won a great battle, but the struggle for Syria was far from over. The question now was whether Khalid and his men could endure the relentless onslaught of the Byzantine Empire's last stand. The Byzantine city of Caesarea, a formidable stronghold with walls that had stood for centuries, now stood as the last major obstacle in the path of the Muslim armies. With only 10,000 men under his command, the great military commander Amr ibn al-As faced an enemy force 3 times his size, as recorded by Ibn al-Athir in his Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh. The stakes were clear. Failure to capture Caesarea would mean the Byzantine Empire could regroup and launch a devastating counterattack, threatening the very existence of the nascent Islamic State. As Amr ibn al-As surveyed the imposing walls of Caesarea, he knew that a direct assault would be disastrous. The city's defenses were too strong and his forces too few. He needed a strategy that would exploit the Byzantine weaknesses while minimizing his own vulnerabilities. Amr had seen firsthand the effectiveness of sieges, but only when properly executed. He recalled the lessons from the siege of Damascus, where careful planning and patience had led to victory. Amr ibn al-As decided to implement a twin strategy of blockade and psychological warfare. He would cut off all supplies to the city, starving the Byzantines into submission, while also sending emissaries to spread fear and disunity among the enemy ranks. As Al-Tabari recorded in his Tarikh al-Rusul al-Muluk, Amr ibn al-As dispatched scouts to locate the Byzantine supply routes and cut them off. He also sent messengers to the city's inhabitants, promising them safety and fair treatment if they surrendered, while warning them of the dire consequences of continued resistance. However, the siege was not without its challenges. The Byzantines, aware of their numerical advantage, launched frequent sorties to break the Muslim blockade. Amr ibn al-As forces had to remain vigilant, repelling these attacks while maintaining the siege. According to Ibn Kathir in Al-Bidaya wa al-Nihaya, the Muslim soldiers endured harsh conditions, facing the elements and the constant threat of Byzantine counterattacks. Yet their faith and determination never wavered. One of the most critical moments in the siege came when the Byzantines attempted a massive breakout. Amr ibn al-As, ever the tactician, had anticipated this move. He had positioned his forces strategically, ensuring that any attempt to break the siege would be met with overwhelming force. As the Byzantine soldiers poured out of the city gates, they were met with a wall of Muslim spears and arrows. The battle was fierce, but Amr ibn al-As forces held firm, repelling the Byzantine attack and inflicting heavy casualties. The turning point in the siege came when Amr ibn al-As received intelligence that the Byzantine commander, Bacchus, was considering surrender. The Muslim commander saw an opportunity to end the siege without further bloodshed. He sent a message to Bacchus, offering him and his men safe passage out of the city in exchange for their surrender. Bacchus, realizing the futility of continued resistance, agreed to the terms. As the Byzantine forces marched out of Caesarea, the Muslim soldiers entered the city to a hero's welcome. The inhabitants, weary of war and starvation, greeted them with relief and hope. Amr ibn al-As ensured that his men treated the city's inhabitants with respect and fairness, fulfilling the promises he had made. This act of mercy and justice would be remembered long after the siege, as a testament to the noble character of the Muslim conquerors. Yet, as the dust settled on the battlefield, a new threat loomed on the horizon. Reports began to filter in of a massive Byzantine army marching south, intent on avenging their defeat and retaking the lost city. Amr ibn al-As knew that the fight for Caesarea was far from over. The Muslim armies would need to prepare for another battle, one that would test their mettle and their resolve once more.